Hello there and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the L24 daily special coverage. I'm your host, Abdurrahim Kashur, and today's focus will be on Ukraine's latest and gas shortages in Europe. Ukraine's national police says that the death toll from a Russian missile strike on a convoy of cars on the outskirts of Zaporizhzhia has risen to 30 people, including children. Police said that 88 people were wounded in Friday's the S-300 missile attack on a column of vehicles that Ukrainian officials said were transport relatives back to safety from Russian-occupied territory. On the other side of Europe, European continent faces unprecedented risk to its natural gas supplies that winter after Russia cut off most pipeline shipments and could wind up competing with Asia for already scarce and expensive liquid gas that comes by ships through the International Energy Agency. Now, to analyze all this information, I'm joined live by Mr. Hussein Askari, Section Manager at the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, and Mr. Abdel Nourtoumi, the North African Studies expert at Orsam Center from France. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us in this discussion. A short break and we'll start our debate. And before we delve into our discussion, let me read for you this piece of information. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said on Sunday that the success of the country's soldiers is not limited to recapture of Lyman, as towns in the Kherson regions have also been liberated. Zelensky added that the story of the liberation of Lyman in the Donetsk regions has now become the most popular in the media and that more lands will be freed soon.
I receive reports from our military. This week, the largest part of the report is the list of settlements and liberated from the enemy within the scope of our ongoing defensive operation. The story of the liberation of Lyman in the Donetsk region has now become the most popular in the media. But the success of our soldiers are not limited to Lyman.
And for better understanding, let's tackle another report concerning this Lyman territory.
Despite the last Russian annexation of 4 regions in the east of Ukraine, the blue and yellow flag was again raised in Lyman. Kiev claimed full control of the town in the Donbas Oblast, which is a crucial railway hub in eastern Ukraine and a city of strategic importance for Moscow.
Throughout this week, new Ukrainian flags have been raised in the Donbas. There will be even more in the week.
Earlier on Saturday, the Ukrainian army claimed to have encircled several thousand Russian soldiers in Lyman who have withdrawn from their defensive positions following the Ukrainian large-scale offensive targeting the area.
Allied troops were withdrawn from Krasny Liman to more favorable lines after being threatened with encirclement.
On the same day, the governor of the Kharkiv region said that 24 civilians were killed in an attack on a convoy of people trying to flee the Kupiansk district, calling it cruelty that can't be justified. However, Russia's defense ministry said its rockets destroyed Ukrainian military targets in the area, but has not commented on accusations that it targeted civilians fleeing.
So, starting with you, Mr. Hussein, more than 95% of voters in the separatist regions reported joining Russia overall. Putin then authorized the annexation of these lands with the signature on a decree. At the time, Ukrainian forces took control of Lyman city, a key strategic location in the Donbass. Do you believe that a true safe zone will exist in these new Russian regions? Will the locals have the opportunity to live this new way of life in a peaceful way?
Thank you very much. I think what we have seen in the past week, especially with these referenda and the annexation of these regions to Russia, the whole landscape of this conflict has changed. There is no more the same anymore after this situation, because before you had a conflict between Ukraine and forces supported by Russia. Now what we have, if these regions become part of so-called motherland Russia, the conflict will be between Russia and NATO. That includes the Ukrainian army supported by. So this is a complete shift in the war and the landscape of the conflict, because this is not business as usual. Now and this also makes the whole situation more dangerous. People are talking about nuclear weapons, talking about world war. I mean, these things should be taken seriously. This is not propaganda, this is a reality. The thing is, Ukraine is being pushed into a situation where they have to make massive sacrifice for strategic goals designed by the West. It is not in the interest of Ukraine to end up in this situation. The best possible solution is to go back to the negotiations table, where it ended in Turkey earlier this year, and find a diplomatic solution for the situation, because what we might be facing is a global war fought with nuclear weapons, and nobody can survive a nuclear war in that sense. Now, the so-called victories achieved by the Ukrainian army, I mean, we have seen these things happen very often. These are tactical achievements or tactical withdrawals by the Russian army for whatever reasons. But the impression they are trying to give is that Ukraine is winning this war against Russia, and if we support Ukraine a bit more, we can defeat Russia. This is not true. This is an illusion, and it's a dangerous illusion.
Thank you ever so much for this explanation. A very good point you have raised. Coming to you, Mr. Abdelnour, referendums in the Donbass, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions reached the end point with a Russian upper hand. In other words, a victory for Moscow's cause. So, how do you explain this latter? Does Russia have the legal right to hold this referendum, or this is another violation of international law by Putin, as the West are claiming?
Good afternoon, sir, and thank you for having me. Yes, indeed. I mean, it is, from the legal point, it is illegal. And according to the UN Charter, Article 1, it is considered as an act of aggression. So now, as your guest stated, we entered into a new phase of this war. I mean, now finally, this war has a name, and this name was put by President Putin himself while doing this, again, tactical move, looking for kind of semi-victory. Actually, he is sending the message to his local audience, to the population in Russia who were up until before Friday a little bit skeptical about what was going on. Now they know finally. I mean, there is a war going on, and this war has finally a name, which is interesting in this. The new dynamic of this war. Now it is clear, it is, I mean, there are some, actually we can use the word belligerent, but there are some implicitly, the West has become belligerent. When I mean by the West, is the Anglo-Saxon West, not the EU, for instance. I mean, meaning by the US, the UK, and the Australian, and I will add to that the Japanese and the South Koreans. So this is, we see how this, the new trajectory of this war, how is, I mean, where is leading. And again, it is very, very dangerous. And the escalation of this is it is an unknown. And another element we can add into this is just after the official declaration of President Putin on Friday, just the reaction of President Zelensky, who actually applied officially to join the NATO. So now we are in a very, very complex situation from on both sides, from the Russian side and from the Western side / the Anglo-Saxon West.
Very good indeed. Mr. Hussein, as you have already stated, kind of is an illusion. Ukraine's advances last couple of weeks pose a question for the whole world. Can Kiev actually win? Some analysts now are confirming that it was a strategic withdrawing by Russians to annex these territories without losing men, but only using these referendum votes, that it was in favor of Moscow's cause. What are you saying about this?
I think military experts, military intelligence experts like Scott Ritter, we had former NATO army chief in Germany, Mr. Kujat, and others who are, who worked in NATO. These are military experts, military generals who are retired now. They said there's no way Ukraine can win this war against Russia. This is a fact. The only thing which will happen is that you will have a continued escalation, and Ukraine is being sacrificed. I just want to tell you a piece of history from my native country, Iraq. We had the Iran-Iraq war for 8 years. In the beginning, every side thought that they will win, and Iraq was backed by the West, by the Anglo-Saxon West, so to speak, by the Arab countries. And we in Iraq, we were told that we are the gatekeepers of the Eastern Front of the Arab world against the Iranian revolution, Khomeini revolution. And we lost 500,000 young men. The Iranians lost even more. But at the end, both sides said, look, we have to give up. Nobody can win this war. But we lost massively. And we lost 8 years, of development and the economic opportunity. So this reminds me of the situation we had, that the Ukrainian people, young men, are being sacrificed in this war to serve somebody else's interests. And I think this is, talking realistically, there is no way Ukraine can win this war. It's just a tragedy. But from now on, this is not going to continue like the Iran-Iraq war for 8 more years. This is the illusion some people have in the West, that we can have a war of attrition against Russia and make Russia lose more and more and weaken Russia, like we did with supporting the Afghan Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and finally force the Soviet Union to withdraw. This is a dangerous illusion, because now we have moved into a new phase of this war. There's a direct confrontation now between Russia and the West, or NATO, or the Anglo-Saxon transatlantic empire, so to speak. So this is a very dangerous situation, and I feel really sorry for the people in Ukraine for being put in this situation.
Perfectly understood, and very good points again you have raised. Now let's check on another point in our discussion. The International Energy Agency said that Europe will face unprecedented risk to its natural gas supplies this winter after Russia cut off most pipelines, or rather pipeline shipments, and could wind up competing with Asia for already scarce, expensive liquid gas that comes by ship.
Talk to people, we just talk to people, we listen to people. I get it. We not only talked to people, we saw people's reactions. We were talking to constituents. We were talking to a whole range of stakeholders, and we felt that the 45p issue, the 45p rate, was drowning out a strong package of intervention on energy, a strong package of intervention on tax cuts for people generally, and we decided not to proceed with getting rid of the 45p.
Sir Abdul, Europe is under a huge gas shortage. It's a dilemma. How do you think they can manage this winter? What are the temporary solutions going to be taken in this meantime?
Actually, the EU, they don't have choice, because, from the beginning of the conflict, they have been divided. And again, I'm going to paraphrase former U.S. Secretary of State. Speaking of Iraq, is the architect of the Iraqi drama, is Donald Rumsfeld, who back then, on the rush to invade Iraq in 2003, he already used the term between the old Europe and the new Europe. So now we see the German or Roman Europe divided versus the Slavic Europe. By this, Hungary is not on the path with France and Germany and Spain and Italy and so on. So this incoherence, even though they are trying to show some coherence on the surface, but it's not working at all, because we already started to see this, and how the high of the inflation. And speaking of, again, I mean, even the UK is no longer a member at the EU, and it belongs to the Anglo-Saxon axis, but is, hurt great deal, so that France, and actually, ironically, just last week, France economy minister, he recommended his fellow citizens, especially public servants, to keep their turtleneck, the sweater, like we say in French, we call roulé, to keep it in the office, to not turn the heat on. So, and also France is very nervous, because they are going to have a severe and very, very harsh winter. So that Italy, and we saw that in in aftermath of the outcome of the legislative elections in Italy, and so on. So now Europe, the EU is totally in disarray and in a panic mode. And they want to end this war, but unfortunately it's not going to end by their will, because they are totally out of it.
Quite understood. Mr. Hussein, analyst, and even you described EU sanctions policies on Russia as a suicidal policy, because they are viewed as a double-edged sword. The whole European continent is suffering from these sanctions. So why would they impose another set of sanctions as they are preparing? Don't you think it's already enough? Why no one can stop US and, let me say, even UK from doing this policy?
Thank you. I think I agree completely with also Dr. Tolmy's description of the situation in Europe. It's going to be terrifying. We live in Europe. In Sweden, we are not dependent on gas. We produce most of the electricity from hydropower and nuclear power, but we are affected by the rise of prices in all over Europe. I think thank you for reminding the viewers of what I said already in March, April, that this is going to be a suicidal policy, because it is. If you look at the reality of the economy of Europe and the total reliance on gas shipped by pipelines, not liquefied natural gas. Liquefied natural gas is very, very small amount. Even if the United States doubles its export to Europe, it will be like less than 10% of what Russia can ship by pipelines every year. So the issue is that what is being missed in the picture is that the underlying cause for all these crises is that we have a transatlantic financial and banking and economic system which has been collapsing. And governments, since especially 2008, this is something which American economist Lyndon LaRouche forecast many years ago, that the financial system, the banking system is going to collapse, but it also will pull down with it the physical, real economy of these nations. They have had an attempt since 2008 to pump money, basically printing digital money by the central banks of the United States, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the Central European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan, to print money and pump into a bankrupt financial and banking system. Now we see that this is not helping very much, because not only it created massive inflation internationally, but many of the banks which were helped, like the Credit Suisse today, which we hear might be insolvent soon. And it's not only one bank. There will be a chain reaction of many banks collapsing in the West, because it's all built on thin air. It's hot air, it's printed money, and has no relationship to the real productive economy of these nations, because we have neglected the real economy in the United States and in Europe for 3-4 decades. And we have been becoming more and more reliant on importing goods from other parts of the world. First of all, you had the cheap gas from Russia, which has continued for decades. And this was one of the reasons for the continued industrialization of Germany, for example. And most of the German industries, the chemical industries, the other materials, completely reliant on cheap Russian gas. Now, when that doesn't exist anymore, German industry is in deep trouble. We have two sides of this situation. We have first the population, who are facing rising electricity bills, but also the rationing of the gas. So people might freeze in the winter. We are already getting instructions how to limit your consumption, but also the industries where people work, the same citizens work. Many of these industries might shut down this winter and the coming year. I mean, the prognosis is that it's not going to only be this winter. We will have bigger problems next year, already in the beginning of the year, but throughout 2023. So we are in a very, very deep economic, financial, banking crisis. And this has only one solution, is to first stop this suicidal policy of starting new wars to dominate the world, and also stop printing money as the basis for economic policy. We need a new Bretton Woods, as the Schiller Institute has proposed, to have a new monetary and financial system to support the real economy, not to support the bankers and speculators in the financial markets. And then establish a stable trade system whereby, for example, oil and gas and other raw materials should be at long-term, relatively fixed price between nations, and not that the prices of oil and gas and commodities should not be decided by markets in Chicago or London or in Holland, but by long-term agreements among nations for import and export of these raw materials. So we can have a more stable international economic system, but also a stable international monetary and currency system.
Very good indeed, Mr. Hussein. Mr. Abdel Noor, what is your comment on this new pack of sanctions? Don't you think that they should look for another way to aid Ukraine rather than keep the same policy? After all, they have failed to secure Ukraine and free Ukraine. Russia already has taken another 4 territories.
Yes, indeed. And we knew from the beginning, I mean, from the first track, and I think the EU now are entering or calling for the 8th track on sanction, and it's not, it doesn't work. And this is experience, I mean, goes back to with Cuban in the 60s, with the Iranians in the 80s, and so on. So, but the Europeans now are cornered, and they don't know what they do, what they do, because they thought they can corner President Putin, and using, of course, I mean, the 2 elements of these 3 dimensions war, the information and intelligence, and also psychological, but they missed the economic element that now has become another weapon in the hands of President Putin, and a wild card. Now he can actually destabilize the entire world market. And this is why these days the Europeans, and notably France and Italy and Spain, even Germany, they are looking for an alternative for the Russian gas via the Gulf countries, in particular Qatar, and of course Algeria, and even on Norway. But all this is not going to be a real alternative to the Russian oil, Russian gas, and also they cannot continue because they are facing serious social movements at home. And we saw actually the strong message that was sent by the far right in Sweden and in Italy, and eventually it could happen also here in France, even though it was, I mean, President Macron is safe now because he just got, I mean, secured his re-election for second term, and he doesn't have to worry about that. But for the near future, for France, for instance, is on this edge, and we saw there are protests in Germany, in the UK, and here in France too. So all this, I mean, to give you the short answer, of course, the sanctions are not working at all.
Perfectly understood. Now let's tackle another point. The chief of the European Commission held on Saturday the official launch of a gas link between Greece and Bulgaria. Speaking at the opening ceremony of the gas interconnector Greece-Bulgaria pipeline in Sofia, Ursula von der Leyen described the pipeline as a game changer. This comes at a time when Russia cut its gas flow almost completely to Europe, which put the continent at a major risk for the next winter. Sir Hussein, how can you explain last week's indicates a gas leak in Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic Sea? Is it a Russian move as that one of maintenance, or this is a real attack to worsen the situation more. And what is your reading about this newly reborn gas pipeline between Greece and Bulgaria?
Well, the Swedish and the Danish authorities last week, when the leak took place, they announced that this is obviously a sabotage because there were detonations. There were seismic measurements of explosions before the leak took place. These were measured by sensors in Sweden and in Denmark. So there's agreement that this was obviously a sabotage. It's not a natural disaster. Now the question is, who has the motive to do that? Who has the logistical ability to do the operation and sneak out of there without being detected? And who is insane enough to launch such a terrible attack on an important infrastructure, but also creating an environmental problem? Now, to say that Russia does not have the motive, if Russia wants to stop gas shipments to Europe, it will just turn off the shipment at the source of it. And logistically, I mean, this area is almost completely controlled by NATO. There were maneuvers all the whole summer. It's called Baltic operations by mostly American and NATO ships, including in the area where these pipelines go back and forth. So Russia has no logistical ability to undetected go and do such a big operation and sneak out of there. So I don't want to speculate who could have done it, but from a police detective standpoint, somebody has to ask these questions. Then you have the pipeline you referenced, Greece, Bulgaria. We had also last week, the same day the explosions took place, there was the inauguration of the Norway-Poland pipeline. These are interesting energy infrastructure things, but these are very small compared to the Russian Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, and also the traditional ones which go on land through Ukraine and Poland to the rest of Europe. Because if we look at it physically, Russia exported about 160 billion cubic meters annually to the EU. These pipelines carry at maximum 10 billion cubic meters per year. So you'll need 15 of such pipelines between Greece and Bulgaria or Norway to Poland to fill the gap and there's no capacity for production in Norway and in Greece or the Cyprus or the Eastern Mediterranean, which is still under development. So there are physical realities which are difficult to go around, but the EU and the EU leadership is trying to use this as a big achievement. It's a big victory. We are changing the game. I don't know what the game is, but to say this is a game changer is a very big exaggeration. It's important for nations to build infrastructure and secure their energy, but this is realistically looked at is not enough to fill the gap created by the absence of Russian gas.
Mm-hmm. Let's tackle another topic to end this discussion. Now, retired four-star General David Petros told ABC News that U.S. and its allies would destroy Russia's troops and equipment in Ukraine if Russian President Vladimir Putin uses nuclear weapons. Let's hear it.
We would respond by leading a collective effort that would take out every Russian conventional force that we can see and identify on the battlefield in Ukraine and also in Crimea and every ship in the Black Sea.
Mr. Abdel-Nour, historically speaking, a nuclear use occurred only a couple times in the WW2 by USA, in Japan, and in Algeria by French colonialism. So, based on this, do you see that there is another nuclear provocation as a threat, or this is merely a political military discourse employed by the Russians following the Western sanctions and threats?
I think it's still, it goes with the rhetoric of this conflict. And I don't think, both sides, whether the Russian or the US will dare to commit such an apocalyptic scenario that the world or the entire world will be facing. It's still, of course, we are here in a game that, doesn't have a name. And again, the U.S. has positioned itself now, again, implicitly as a direct belligerent in this conflict. But as you said, sure, I mean, Americans knows better because, I mean, they are the one who, I mean, they did use it. I mean, literally, they imploded the Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And of course, later on, it was the French colonial, I mean, authorities did use some experiences in Algerian Sahara. But the context is not the same today. I mean, now there are new rules and there is the AA that is watching all this. And also the use of the nuclear, it comes in terms of the dissuasion, not in action. So all this, again, I don't think will, I mean, any of the two belligerents will use this because it will be very, very, I mean, an apocalyptic scenario for the entire humanity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abdel Noor Toumi. Mr. Hussein, as last couple words, what can you say? Do you really believe that Russia can use its nuclear arsenal in Ukraine?
No, I mean, military experts, which I have watched their commentaries. I mean, I'm not a military expert, but they say Russia has no reason to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. What President Putin is talking about is responding to a threat, existential threat to Russia, which means that the response will not be in Ukraine, the response will be all over the world, especially in Europe, Western Europe, and the United States. That's what the nuclear strategy is based on. It's not based on limited. There is no limited. This is an illusion. People like Petraeus can talk about a limited nuclear strike. There is no such a thing as a limited nuclear strike. When the nuclear weapons are deployed, all the nuclear weapons are deployed by all parties. That's the idea of deterrence, that you have a doomsday scenario which you should not touch, don't get close to it. Dr. Toumi said that we had the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years anniversary, actually just last week, I think. And, you know, at the time, the world was facing an almost certain extinction of the human race if President Kennedy had not intervened with Khrushchev and said, look, let's talk. We cannot go ahead with this. What do you want? Let's go back and negotiate and find a solution.
Thank you, Mr. Hussein. I'm sorry to cut you train of thought, Mr. Hussein.
People who are wise enough like Kennedy.
I'm sorry to cut you train of thought, Mr. Hussein, but we have reached the limit of our time. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Mr. Abdel Noor from France, Mr. Hussein from Sweden, thank you ever so much for taking part with us in this debate. Now, you can watch again this special coverage on IL24 News on YouTube channel. And for now, take care. Bye-bye.